So this is looking at Act 3 of Journey's End by R.C. Sheriff. There are previous two videos in this series which cover the starting points of Act 3. Here we're going to pick up on Act 3, Scene 2. And in my copy of the text, which is the Penguin Modern Classics, it's page 81. We're going from the kind of conversation with Hibbert, Trotter and Stanhope when they're in the dugout with the champagne dinner to celebrate, or to at least to superficially celebrate, the successful raid and the capture of the young German soldier. So we're going to pick up at this particular point where Stanhope's criticising Trotter for blabbing about the war and all the emotions that verb choice show in terms of blabbing, not being able to control yourself, possibly indulging yourself, talking about something unnecessarily, because Stanhope is using the evening and is using the alcohol provided for the evening as a way of distracting himself and trying to stop himself paying any attention to Osborne's death. And it descends into a kind of trivial and sort of fragmented he said, she said kind of conversation, showing almost that the men are trying to jump on any sort of distraction and are all very kind of upset and traumatized in an underlying way, that they're kind of operating at the end of their tolerance at this point. Now Hibbert jumps in again with one of his stories about women, and we've already established that Hibbert's view of women is inherently misogynistic. He is objectifying women. He's using these stories about his exploits to try and gain kind of kudos, Kudos, in the eyes of the men around him. And he's trying to kind of basically, I suppose, restore a damaged reputation with a great sense of relief that, at least for now, he's survived. So he's determined to kind of keep going, and he's also drunk enough that he is no longer sensitive to the nuances of the conversation, the idea of rank and hierarchy there. I mean, in modern times, I suppose we'd use the phrase read the room. He's definitely not reading the room at this point. Stanhope's, reaction, I don't know, I expect you did, is designed to close down that anecdote, whereas Hibbert presses on regardless, undismayed. He's completely ignoring the cues that Stanhope is giving out. And so Stanhope tries again, and that dash there shows the interruption. Yes, and it's late now. You go on duty. You'd better go. The way Stanhope talks, it's short. It's largely monosyllabic. It's clipped, and it is restating the kind of idea of orders from a superior officer. There is no longer any pretense of camaraderie. Stanhope is operating at the end of his tolerance with Hibbert. And Hibbert again fails to pick this up. It's all right, I'm as fresh as a daisy. Are forcing Stanhope to repeat this order, which Hibbert is kind of forgetting himself, forgetting rank, forgetting hierarchy, and he is taking this more as a suggestion. And the comment he makes back to Hibbert, I say that's a nice end to a jolly evening. That kind of almost kind of, he has the moral high ground there just about. It's still on the cusp of what you'd be able to say to a superior officer. It's still kind of blurring those boundaries, but it's blurring them in the right way. Stanhope can control himself because he's aware that he might be overreacting. He gets that apology, I'm sorry, I'm tired, which is the human kind of apology rather than the officer's standing on rank. But Hibbert, again, doesn't kind of pick up on the tone of the situation. He's completely kind of oblivious to what's going on. And this, well, you better go to bed, is very definitely a step too far. And the silence that follows kind of shows how everybody else there has realised that boundary's been crossed. Stanhope has realised that, he's not prepared to be spoken to like that. And Hibbert is again completely inappropriate in terms of failing to realise what's going on. So that stage direction sniggers. A snigger is a kind of smug, sneaky laugh. So he doesn't understand, and he feels, his I was only joking, and what was that you said? I was only joking, is the kind of response, I suppose, of the friend rather than of the kind of serving soldier. And Stanhope is asking him to repeat it because it's this checking that he's understood and making Hibbert realise exactly what he's said, exactly what he's done. So I said, you better go to bed. Of course, the kind of context here, or the subtext of it, is Hibbert is alluding to the fact that Stanhope is, way drunker than anybody, or should be way drunker than anybody. And, if anybody's night is going to come to an end, albeit prematurely, then it should be Stanhope's. And that is not something that Stanhope is going to tolerate hearing on any level. So, the idea of Stanhope's flushed face, the flushed in that stage direction, reminds us that, Stanhope is both now suffering the effects of excess alcohol, that alcoholic flush, and is also now beginning to flush with anger, emotion, kind of that unrestrained kind of anger that's going to burst out. And still Hibbert doesn't understand, the ghost of a snigger. He can't keep his face straight. He thinks he said something really big and really clever. He's like the kind of school child who won't give up when they're asked to repeat something in front of the teacher. They still think they can get some kind of respect from their friends. And Stanhope kind of tells him to get out, and then repeats that, and the idea of the unsteady and blustering. Hibbert is all of a sudden less sure of himself. If you bluster, then you're trying to kind of faff round and try and disguise what you've done, or make amends, or basically kind of keep distracting from the situation. And clearly Stanhope's anger is escalating with these repeated exclamations, because he realises that, he's got to go. With a frightened glance, he sneaks quietly, leaving just the guns. And Stanhope's comment of "little worm gets on my nerves" reveals, the underlying contempt he feels about everything for which Hibbert stands. And that's the feigning neuralgia, that's the kind of moral cowardice, the actual cowardice, the misogyny, the kind of cheap comments about women, the objectification, the kind of lack of respect, just everything encapsulated in that epithet "little worm." Okay. Trotter tries to smooth things over, or so, tries to make amends, but Stanhope can see the kind of man inside the kind of persona. He has a repulsive little mind. There is nothing honourable, there is nothing resilient against Hibbert. He is the complete antithesis, the complete opposite of everything that Stanhope values or stands for. Stanhope then moves the focus onto Trotter and the idea that from, two men who have shown extreme emotion in the face of kind of the war and the war experience, that's Stanhope's drinking and Hibbert's cowardice and Hibbert's kind of, I suppose, other coping mechanisms. Trotter seems to be completely on an even keel, and yet we don't know whether he's not psychologically complex enough to process this. He certainly can't articulate it. He certainly can't kind of, say what he feels. I don't know. I whistle sometimes. How do you cope? He's kind of seems to be quite a simple, almost in his own way, childlike creature. And the idea of I feel all blown out now. We don't know whether or not this is Stanhope kind of patting his belly in terms of, there's some allusion to food, but also maybe that kind of slight psychological come down, the kind of sense of anticlimax that the evening has ended badly. I feel all blown out now. I feel like I'm a bit down now. And again, there's that pause. There's the implicit contrast, the juxtaposition of what they're both drinking. So we've got Trotter on tea, Stanhope on whiskey. And then he picks up, Hibbert's postcards again. The idea that Trotter doesn't judge Hibbert, again, is a kind of a different way of approaching the war. He doesn't seem to react. He just seems to kind of take everything on an even keel. Before he goes, there's this sort of conversation which both of them have thought about, but neither of them has explicitly acknowledged, that Osborne's death means that Trotter is now second in command. And you hadn't said nothing about it, but that kind of is the unvoiced presence of Osborne in the room. He doesn't want to say, with Osborne dead. So he lets that kind of either fade away, or the actor playing Stanhope comes in on that dash to kind of stop Trotter saying it, to stop having to kind of face the and there's the righto skipper, thanks, I won't let you down idea of duty, obligation, understated kind of sense of duty from Trotter. And he, as he's leaving, he's kind of reassuring, always looking sort of slightly on the brighter side, but this idea of, it's hot as hell in here with all them damn candles burning. You get the sense of claustrophobia. You get the sense of this kind of suffocating atmosphere, as well as the direct, reference to hell. It's as hot as hell. The idea that the men are living in this sort of hell, albeit not the kind of fiery type, but the ongoing awful experience. Stanhope's reference of, I suppose it is, my head's nearly splitting, is a reference to the heat, is a reference to the noise, is a reference to the experience, and also to the effect of the drink. We then have Trotter disappearing, Stanhope taking a minute before Mason comes in, and finally Raleigh, who has been with the men, the idea that Hibbert was making such a fuss before of the fact that he's not eating with us, he's eating up there. And Stanhope has had enough time here to be brooding on Raleigh's absence and to be reading into it all the things that are going to annoy and upset and anger him, because he is an intelligent enough man to be aware of all of the implications of Raleigh's absence, all of the implied criticism, all of the kind of emotional kind of difficulties that Raleigh's absence brings. And then added to that, this habit that we saw earlier of him importing motivations to Raleigh and judgments and moral criticisms that Raleigh hasn't made or doesn't have. So, Stanhope acts against Raleigh because he makes him aware of his own vulnerability and his own shortcomings and his own weaknesses. And this is kind of building up here. So again, we have the kind of lack of fluency, the fragmentation, the idea of Stanhope standing on his rank. I thought I told you to come down to, and again, that order and that hierarchy. And Stanhope kind of behaving like, the prefect in school or the head boy in school that he would have been. And it's a kind of, it's almost a schoolyard or a school kind of thing, telling off. And with Stanhope taking the role of the teacher or the master there, knowing that this is the language to which Raleigh is vulnerable. This is the language, or this is the language of the world that he's only just left. This, well, you need to explain yourself. Well, what did you say? What did you... That kind of question and answer in the style of the schoolyard. He also chooses, his words, you've been feeding with the men, has got a sense of kind of lack of civility about it. And, not letting Raleigh finish a sentence, interrupting, is all this show of authority. Stanhope as well takes the moral high ground, which is kind of acting as a cover for what he really feels. Obviously we're aware that the subtext here is that Stanhope is as hurt and as upset as anybody, if not more, by Osborne's death, but is kind of, I suppose, making Raleigh suffer for manifesting his own distress or his own upset in a different way. So he goes for the kind of honourable argument. You're taking the men's food. They asked me to share. He plays on the kind of apparent innocence and naivety of Raleigh to make him feel like he's done something wrong, or that he's done something unacceptable or something stupid. That he has made a fool of himself, that he has committed a social or a military faux pas, that they are laughing at you. And he really does kind of go for every emotional vulnerability that Raleigh may be susceptible to. Are you criticising my leadership? Do you not know the men are laughing at you? Do you not know this? And it's all about Stanhope's own perception of his own inadequacies and feelings. Raleigh apologises, because that is again the honourable thing to do, and yet Stanhope keeps going, won't leave it alone. It's that idea of him wanting to make the other man suffer. Kind of, he's hurting, so he wants to kind of release some of that pressure by upsetting Raleigh, by kind of kicking downwards. And therefore everything he is accusing Raleigh of are all the stuff that Raleigh would not want to be thought of as. It's all about this idea of masculinity and honour and, being a good egg and being, this kind of brave public school boy, whose integrity is the best. So he accuses him of lying. He accuses him of insulting other people, all things that Raleigh would be really sensitive to. And therefore, he's in the end lost for words, because he can't really grasp what he's done, and he can't see why Stanhope's rage is kind of escalating, and that it's about more than what it appears to be on the surface. And when Raleigh tries to kind of make it right, because, if you're taking this on the surface, you upset Trotter and Hibbett, well, I'll speak to them, I didn't realise. It's that moment that, Stanhope is shaking, and we have to take it that the shaking is a culmination of anger, intense emotion, just sheer exhaustion, and possibly kind of alcohol withdrawal, or the effects of alcohol. And if he's shaking so much, possibly also shell shock, but these are all physical manifestations of his vulnerability, and therefore he absolutely does not want Raleigh to see them. There's then that moment of silence and contemplation, and the atmosphere changes because it gives Raleigh the space to be able to voice some of the deeper kind of thoughts and suspicions and feelings that he's had. So Raleigh has kind of grown up quite a lot just during the course of the play, because when he was signing up and trying to get into Stanhope's company, he didn't appreciate or didn't have any chance of realising the pressure or the kind of impact that might have on Stanhope. And now he's seen things. Now, he's actually seen the shaking and everything that goes with that kind of firsthand. He's realising that this is a much deeper, much bigger issue than he could have predicted, and that there are other issues there. And he's grown up a bit. So I'm awfully sorry, Dennis, if I annoyed you by coming to your company. So we get that first line evoking their shared past and their family or potential family connection. And Stanhope is maybe not ready for that conversation. You know, what on earth are you talking about? Resent you being here? You know, I don't know what you mean, right? So Raleigh is kind of becoming somebody who is facing his emotions, who is getting that more perceptive level of understanding. But Stanhope is kind of throwing that off, is kind of deflecting that, so he doesn't have to deal with the implications of it for himself. And, you know, with the whole kind of outburst and everything for Stanhope is symptomatic, is indicative of a much more deeply held trauma that, you know, the conversation or the argument about dinner becomes kind of the idea that Stanhope wants to ignore Osborne's death, wants to not give voice to it, wants to cope with things by kind of drowning them in alcohol, you know, this idea of drowning his sorrows, whereas it looks like Raleigh is going to talk about it. And this, again, if you're looking at the concept of masculinity and the definitions of heroism of the time, you know, that idea of a stiff upper lip, of keeping a lid on your feelings, of not acknowledging those. Stanhope's adopting that paradigm, that kind of model of masculinity. And he realises that, you know, that might come over as unfeeling. And so he has this conflict, this internal conflict at that moment, when he really wants to make it clear to Osborne that he cares just as much as, to Raleigh, sorry, that he cares just as much about Raleigh as Osborne's death, but their ways of expressing that, the ways of dealing with it, of processing it, are very different. So we have that kind of Raleigh, this fragmentation of his language. His voice is breaking up, his speech is breaking up. He's no longer articulate. He can't bring himself to kind of express what he's saying. And Stanhope takes it as a kind of personal insult, if you like, because Raleigh doesn't understand. He's gone for the surface idea of, you know, they're all sitting there and drinking champagne, so they don't care. But Stanhope is trying to say it's because absolutely he cares too much that he's been trying to adopt that approach. It's entirely to forget. And the repetition of forget, forget, forget. You think there's no limit to what a man can bear. That's a much, much bigger question. You know, that is kind of really going to the heart of the play in a lot of ways. How much can a man bear? What effect does that have on people? You know, even there, he goes to the dark corner. You know, you've got all the symbolism there, the dark corner by Osborne's bed. That is psychologically a dark place for him, as well as a dark place in the dugout. And, you know, his shoulders heaving as he fights for breath. The emotion is about to overcome him. So we get, again, a recurrence of that name, Dennis, kind of with all of the support and all of the affection and respect that embodies from Raleigh. You know, I'm sorry I didn't understand. And again, Raleigh has not quite understood something in the trenches because he's new, he's a young man, he's immature, he's not had this awful kind of baptism of fire in full as yet. And Stanhope just wants to be left alone, and then his moment of kind of pleading almost turns into kind of wild anger and exclamation. So Stanhope is alone, both metaphorically and literally on the stage, with the lights rising and falling outside, the darkness being symbolic of the kind of psychological darkness he's suffering, and the idea that the kind of gunfire, the war is inescapable, the sound of conflict is pervasive, just as his psychological conflict is inescapable and pervasive. Okay, we're going to leave that there for now. I hope that's useful.